Nigeria's money supply has surged to an all-time high of 107.1 trillion naira. This is according to, data being released by the Central Bank of Nigeria. And one might wonder, why do we have, an increase in money supply despite the numerous efforts that have been seen come from the Central Bank of Nigeria to mop up liquidity? Well, good thing we have an expert here with us in the studio. I am joined now by an economic analyst, Dr. Aliyu Ilias. Thank you, Doctor, for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Doctor, let's begin by you giving us an understanding. Again, I ask, we have seen numerous efforts come from the CBN, especially in the area of, mopping up liquidity and, reducing inflation. But again, we seem to have too much money chasing fewer goods, as one of the commenters said today. Money supply rising to 107.1 trillion naira in the month of August. Let us hear from you. How can we juxtapose these two separate scenarios?
Right. I think in basic economies, when you have money supply, it has positive and negative implications. So it depends on what is currently happening in our country. So number one, if you have money supply growing more than the economic growth itself, it's the negative one, because when you have such, it's pretty difficult to lead to inflation. But when you have your economy going as it's supposed to be, money supply may lead to lower interest rates. And when lower interest rates happens, it brings in more investment. And when we have more investment, people have more money in their pockets. But in our case, our economy is not growing. And what's the factor of this money supply? If you ask me, basically I would say it's because of government expenditure.
It's because of government expenditure. And I'm sure some of our viewers who are watching and may be saying, oh, but how does this impact me? I would like for you to, explain, especially in layman language, to the people who are wondering, how does this impact my pocket? How does this impact my business? How does this impact my family? What would your response to that be?
Right. Isn't it funny that we say there's money supply in Nigeria and our purchasing power is very, very low? That's quite contradicting. That simply means that at this level of NPR, I can tell you manufacturing sector, MSME are not getting more money to even do business because of the interest. People are not going to bank. But meanwhile, we have governments who usually expend 600 billion within the third tier of the government, but now are sharing 1.3 trillion per month. And where's the money going? Are they converting those money to dollars? Are the money going to the quasi that we are talking about? Are the money actually going to the real sector that will transfer to people? And that is the question. That's why I said it has positive and negative. But in our case, we do not have economic growth, but we have money supply, which leads to inflation as we are actually seeing it.
So the bottom line of all you're saying is this is in fact a negative development.
Right. It's quite negative, and it will bring in more inflation, like we actually see.
Unfortunately so. But let's go now on a short break. So much more to come, especially regarding the recently released data by the Central Bank of Nigeria showing that Nigeria's money supply has risen even further to 107.1 trillion naira. And my guest, who is an economic analyst, Dr. Aliyu Ilias, is still on standby. Do stay. And welcome back from that time out. You are still watching Business Daily, which is coming to you live on Trust TV. And just before the break, we went through social media comments so far. We have gotten quite a number of interesting responses to the discourse on today's edition of the program. And the focus is on the recent data released by the Central Bank of Nigeria showing that Nigeria's money supply has risen, to an all-time high of 107.1 trillion naira. And the question on the most minds of, social media commenters is, how does this impact me? How does this impact my pocket? Again, inflation. And this is despite the effort of the Monetary Policy Committee and the monetary side of government generally towards nipping inflation in the bud and mopping up liquidity. But I still have my guest here with me. He is an economic analyst in the person of Dr. Aliyu Ilias. Thank you again, Doctor, for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Doctor, you've spoken regarding, how this will impact the average Nigerian's pocket, talking about higher prices of goods, higher prices of services. But I'd like for you to explain the disconnect between, the CBN's policies. Interest rate has been increased by over 800 basis points so far in the year 2024. And we still have, numbers like this being reeled out by the CBN. But what would you say is the major contributor to this?
Right. I think it's a major contradiction of policy, because if you look at the last MPC, we are expecting government to even tarry, especially CBN, to tarry to an extent to saying, okay, MPR remain the same, so that we will not have further. But to our surprise, and I don't know how they can justify that, because it's quite surprising and it defies basic logic that you're having level of this inflation, then you are still increasing the MPR. So you want to kill growth because you want to reduce inflation. But in the long run, you're supposed to balance the two, so that at least you can now give people a breathing space in terms of business people to actually work things out. And that's why we are seeing this result we are seeing keep going higher. Even the temporary reduction in inflation was quite temporary because of farm produce. I'm sure it will go back in the next outcome by NBS.
You did say it was a surprise to you,
right?
Talking about the increase in the MPR.
Yes.
May I ask why that was surprising?
Right, it's quite surprising because looking at the economy, from the exception of Chiamaka Enendu, it has continued to actually increase. And you could see from the analysis of Daily Trust as well that it has been increased by 850 basis points. So by the time you do it for 5 months, and you see that it's not actually helping the economy, so you have tarry, not even reducing it. Stay there and see how things actually work. But to our surprise, you are sacrificing. That's why I said you are approaching hawkish approach to solve the economy, which is quite a surprise. So you have to study the economy. What's the major factor? And just like the same thing we are seeing now, we are seeing more expenditure because you are now doing a temporary and interventional approach to solve major problems that are structural in nature. So if you are doing that, it will continue to happen, and that's why we see continuous inflation. So with this report we are seeing now, that means we are still going back. We are eroding the gain we achieved for 2 months consecutively, and we're going back to another level of inflation.
But let me ask you, you've spoken regarding the hawkish approach by the CBN. Quite drastic measures, have been taken so far. And some on one hand would say, that those, or applaud the efforts of the CBN. And some on the other hand would say, you increase, you watch, you pause for a while before you increase again, like you rightly stated. But how then can the CBN approach it in a manner where they do not, stop growth on one hand just because they're tackling inflation? Because it seems as though everything else has been put on pause just to tackle inflation specifically.
Right. When there is increase in MPR, it brings a serious problem. And what's the serious problem is that, as we know that about 85% of Nigerian businesses are MSME, and most of them need money, they need liquidity to actually do their business. And where do they get this business from? The money from is from banks or other approaches to actually get money, but which revolve back to bank loan. Then also, manufacturing sector also need more money, because even now we are talking about import substitution, we're talking about backward integration. So how do you achieve that? Now most companies are leaving Nigeria. ordinarily as they are living, it should be an opportunity for other indigenous
smaller
companies
businesses
to take over such issues. Let me take you to pharmaceutical. If you buy a particular medicine at 2,000 naira before GSK left, now it's about 10,000 plus. So there has been an advantage for a small an indigenous company to take over. But when the indigenous company cannot even access funds to do their businesses, and that's why you see go to other economies, their country are very intentional by creating enabling environment, infrastructure, and fund for them to actually do the business. But in our case, we are killing those industry the more by increasing our MPR. I don't know why we continue this trajectory, and that's why people like me, it defies my own logic that how can you increase more when you're expected to hold on, you observe it for 3 months, then you now review again, but you just continue, you keep tightening the economy, having a contrast approach, sacrificing the growth, and the growth is what will have a multiplier effect on people's pocket in the long run. Because how many people are you actually solving? You may think it's just for people that are collecting loan, but the loan will have make an expansionary of the economy itself. So it's quite certain that we're having this approach. But going forward again, I think by the time we see the next NBS report on inflation, maybe that would have showed them signal that the temporary reduced inflation that you've seen is function of farm produce like tomato, like yam, and we are going to also suffer in the long run, because look at the flood we are having now. That flood is a factor that we need to consider too, because it's going to show in the long run, maybe next 2-3 months, because people are supposed to harvest some produce at that period. And that's why I said they are sacrificing growth because they want to reduce inflation at all costs.
But let me, in the defense of the CBN,
right,
looking at the broader picture, inflation is a major challenge. Reducing the value of the naira, reducing, the cost of, I should say, the standard amounts, that is minimum wage now. The value of minimum wage drastically has dropped, which is an after effect of inflation, trickling down to the naira itself, that is the Nigerian currency. But would you say the efforts of the CBN are totally or have totally not yielded any results so far?
Right. On a basic analysis, they may think they are, but there are some factors. As I say, it is quite structural. Now, you are saying there's more money in circulation. But I can tell you, as a business person, as people on the street, there is no money in people's pockets.
So it's back to government spending.
Exactly. So it's about government spending. And that's why we say, if you are giving money to state government and local government, you have increased it by ×2, because 600 billion to 1.3 trillion. That's quite huge. I think the last one was 1.150 trillion. Right. So that shows that there is more money to the state. What are those states using that money to do? That is the question. Are they using it on capital projects? Are they using it on recurrent expenditure? Or are they taking it back door to the forex market? These are the things we have to establish, because it shows that there's more money truly, and more money is coming through those hands, not private sector. I can tell you, private people does not have. If you also look at the analysis of that money in supply, 70% of it is in quasi. Right, not one deposit is like 31 trillion or so. So that quasi simply means that people have an instrument that at any point in time they can easily exchange it to what? To money. That's what simply means. So it simply means some people, maybe I wouldn't say governments totally, have a lot of dollars in their house that at any point in time they can do what? Convert it to naira, and that's why we are having that. So I think government needs to be conscious of the money they're actually spending. Perhaps government is also doing a cash transfer, which is temporary. I recall the last one they said they give it to about thousands of people, now around 99 or so, and in different. This temporary intervention is a problem. Why don't you convert this money you are giving to a CNG, whereby everybody, it will be like brick and mortar. We can go anywhere. For me, since 2 months, I've been trying to convert my car.
But I understand that there is a promo ongoing at the moment.
Which promo?
Regarding conversion.
The fact is that I've been to 2 centers. They've collected my details up till now for about a month plus now. They've not called me. If I'm thinking this week I will go there again, because I went there, even went to the conversion center. The guy that's converting told me that he's the only one converting at that center, and he's going to convert 7 cars for 2 weeks. So up till now, I don't. And I went to one, they said they don't have kids. So it's quite sad. So you are not focusing on the right thing that would have bring down the cost of things, goods and services in Nigeria. But you are looking at giving transfer and giving interventional, approach, which may not last more than a month. And these people are taking it directly to the market as well. So that increases the money supply as well.
Well said. You have made mention of quasi money, and I would like for us to, continue the conversation from there, which we have seen, rise sharply in recent times. Well, how has that, affected the cost of imported goods and the cost of or inflation generally?
Well, basically, when we talk about quasi, it simply means monetary instruments that you can easily convert. It could be bond, it could be treasury bill, it could be, a different way. It could be gold, a lot of what you can easily change. So the fact remains that people are now speculating.
Hedging against inflation.
Exactly. People are not speculating. And I can tell you as a business person, at this point, I would prefer to go and save my money, buy a quasi, or save my money and get interest on my own than to go and invest. So it's quite discouraging at this point in time to go and invest. Because if you invest, it's quite, dicey. You wouldn't know. And if perhaps you want to invest and you need more money, you have to go to bank to get money at high interest. So you change your mind, let me buy some instruments that I can also exchange. So people are resorting to that approach of businesses, and it's that simply shows that it is not based on normal trading, normal businesses. You are now speculating, and what does speculation causes? It causes a lot of inflation, because people will now, instead of them to do normal business, they will now be looking at a shortcut approach to business.
Okay, you made mention earlier regarding, the drop we saw in inflation. You said it was temporal.
It's temporary.
And
and it's marginal at the same time.
Okay, I'd like for you to hear why you say that it was temporal.
Well, we have seen it for 2 months now, and it's, like I said, it's quite marginal. It shouldn't have much effect unless we sit for like 5 months, 6 months before we can now start seeing the effects. But why do I say it's temporary? Is because of, if you look at the major cost of our inflation, is food related inflation. Then, if you also look at what dropped in our inflation, is food also related drop that we've seen. And that simply is a function of reduction in markets. If you go to markets now, you see that tomato has actually reduced the price to an extent. Yam, especially last 2 months, to an extent, simply because there are more produce. You understand? So, and when there are more produce in the market, it's results to, purchasing power will be high to an extent, because you would have used all your 10,000 hours to buy tomato, you would have resort to use 5,000. So you have 5,000 balance to do other things, and that's what we see in the drop of inflation, not really the structural problem that we have that has been solved.
And as we speak, we are, marching towards the fourth quarter of 2024,
which is always come with some level of inflation.
And again, a new month, the month of October.
Right.
So I would like for you to speak regarding your predictions. Prediction for inflation, prediction for GDP growth or GDP figures for the month of October, for the last quarter of the year.
Right. Now, for the last quarter of the year, ideally, you always see inflation growing, because, November, December, people tend to spend more, a lot of activities goes on. But from what we are seeing, I may say for next month that we are seeing now, we may have the inflation to remain the same. Because, and another thing is that you recall that the fuel was 617 before, now is about 1,000. It's also going to reflect in the inflation. So is either it stay at the same level or we have increase in inflation. It cannot go down further. Then in terms of growth, if you look at growth generally, I think growth we are beginning to see much more development in that sector. We only hope we can actually sustain growth the more. Because if you look at a country like Ghana, they are doing 6.9 times of growth, while we are still struggling between 3.93. So it's quite diverse. But that's why we said there must be enabling environment. Energy crisis is a major problem in Nigeria. You could see that. I was looking at the headline you are showing when the minister said 40% of Nigerians now enjoy stable power.
24 hours power supply.
It's quite surprising. He should have said people in band A enjoy more power, or 40% of people in band A enjoy more power supply, because it does not really reflect in other bands like C, D and E. So I don't think that is quite correct. So we should subject that to interrogation for me. Then I think if we can get energy security right, we can have a better development in Nigeria.
Indeed, energy security or energy costs, have played a major role in core inflation specifically.
Right.
You did speak about food inflation, but core inflation has been a major concern.
Because it's got a lot of money from us. You have to get your power, what you have to power. You have to buy diesel at the high cost, buy fuel at the high cost, and the alternative energy that we should have been using, which is electricity, has now also soared high. So it's quite a serious problem. And a serious country would have considered looking at it critically and make sure that it's quite affordable and available.
When you mean affordable and available, I'd like for you to expatiate on that, mitigating this energy crisis.
Right. The fact remains that it is clear that we don't have available energy in Nigeria. For us now, you can have, even with the band A, tomorrow there can be grid collapsing. And when grid collapse, what happens? It could take 2 weeks, and what happened to your production process? You have to spend more in that. And when you talk about PMS, you agree with me that there's no station you go in that you not queue. And if you don't queue today, tomorrow you are not sure of what actually happened. And not only that, it's not available. It's not available. It's also very, very expensive. Now it's over around 1,000 naira, and that will reflect in your production, and you will have to push it to the consumer. So consumers suffer the brunt in the long run.
Okay, still on our discourse for today, which is obviously on the increase in money supply, about 107 trillion naira, according to the Central Bank of Nigeria. Some might say that, an increase in money supply could stimulate short-term growth by making credit more accessible when there's too much money in circulation. Do you agree with that? And let's hear from you regarding how this will impact in businesses, impact in employment as well.
Right. Basically, like I said, when there is money supply, as an economy, we want to look at it from two perspectives. When there is money supply like this, sometimes if you have good economy, where everything about your economy is functioning as supposed to be, then you have economic growth as expected. Money supply would have been another thing that will reduce even the inflation itself. Because when interest rates is lower, people access more money, and there will be more money in my pocket, then my purchasing power will be actually high. But in Nigeria cases where we have challenges in our economy, it's a negative thing for us. It simply means future challenges, in fact, immediate future challenges, because it simply means there will be much more inflation coming our way. And that's why we said the CBN needs to look at other approaches, beyond. And another challenge we have in Nigeria is that most time the CBN will be applying all their monetary policy approach, while the fiscal policy will not actually work in tandem with what they are doing. Then we also have issues with trade policy as well. So these three things need to work together to engender development in Nigeria. So for me, this increase is a negative one for Nigerians, and it's quite challenging.
I would want to take up your thoughts on fiscal policy and the government's role, especially from the fiscal side. Rising debt profile, continuous borrowing from the fiscal side of government. But how does borrowing, especially, and spending contribute to this money supply?
When you say borrowing, ideally, borrowing wouldn't have been a bad thing, because every economy, even the best of the economy, actually borrow. But what do we borrow for? When you borrow for money, something that is not project tied in nature, it may lead to a rise in inflation, because it will just transfer money to people who are not expected to have it, and they will be spending it. It will lead to maybe much money, money supply, and that's the challenge we are facing. The money we are borrowing, we should borrow to strengthen our reserve. Money that you are borrowing that is going to go there, so that it will cushion the challenges on forex demand, because in the long run, our problem is still on forex, the value of naira, because it has devalued to an extent that, and is a function of what's happening in inflation that is devaluing our money.
And I would like for you to speak regarding the CBN having a balancing act in the sense that, of course, we are grappling with rising inflation, but then on the other hand, we need to balance prioritizing growth and prioritizing tackling inflation, that is inflation control.
Yes.
But like I stated before, it seems that all the efforts are being put towards tackling inflation. But I'd like for you quickly, in like 2 minutes, to share your thoughts with us on how that balance can be created.
Right. I think the balance can be created because, when you have your manufacturing sector, your MSME, when they are able to access fund, it transfer to much more liquidity. It also transfer to employment opportunity, and in long run transfer to balance in GDP. Because when you have people access money and they can produce, and people have the purchasing power to buy over time, it simply means you are creating more employment, because all these things are like, interwoven. So if you try to kill the interest, discourage people rather, because what they are doing is to discourage people to borrow, and try to tighten the level of money in the circulation. But if you allow people to borrow to an extent, when they access fund and they go into manufacturing as expected, about 50% of MSME are buoyant to really do businesses very well. It will in the long run help the economy, because employment will be there, and we have a good GDP. But if you negate that because you want to kill the inflation and not stop, in fact, let's even look at food inflation. Food inflation itself. You recall that our major problem is supply chain, and it's a factor of government policy, because if we don't have removal of fuel subsidy, perhaps maybe we have removal of fuel subsidy and we have CNG available, we won't have issue with food supply chain. It will not cost for you to move food from Bauchi to Abuja. I'm sure you know how much. It's even costlier than the amount you are going to buy the commodity itself. And that transfer to a serious problem to the economy. So for me, I think they should hold on this MPR, while you see use other tools to actually control the inflation itself.
But it seems as though most fingers are pointing towards the CBN, that is the monetary side. And one may ask, what of the fiscal side? What can be done in the area of fiscal policy towards addressing this concern? I
think in all fairness, when we go to fiscal policy, let me just move to the custom, which is a major hub. If you look at the way custom are actually increasing everything, and government said they are going to hold on so that people can import. I've not seen that policy working, because if you look at custom duty, everything is just going high and high. And if you also look at FRS, there's always a means to expand. In fact, have you noticed the new bill which said that every person living in Nigeria must have NIN? Do you know the major aim? The major aim is to capture the foreigners and also tax them as well. When foreigner is here in Nigeria and when any transaction comes in, if you don't have NIN, you wouldn't know, you can't be able to measure it. But if it goes into if they have NIN, you could measure it and charge them appropriately. You could also see the new bill in front of National Assembly to increase the VAT also to 10%. But for me, I think we should expand our tax net, not increasing the size of the what we charge. Maybe we can also hold on 7.5 and make sure we expand. And the idea of the tax net, which is a good one, is the idea of making sure that every person living in Nigeria have NIN. So for me, I think the fiscal policy also need to adjust, especially through the import duty, because if we are bringing things in and it's very, very expensive, it becomes a problem for them to actually, do the business. So most people have hold on that we will not import. And you can also see what is happening to even our fuel importation. You know how many forex you have to source for it to import. And that's part of what is causing inflation too. Because by the time people have to source, about 40% of our forex, expenditure is going through the importation of fuel itself. If we can actually kill that through maybe Dangote and other, or our own refinery working, I think we would have solved a lot of problems. So these are the other factors we need to see beyond CBN itself.
Well said. All of these factors are interwoven. The fiscal side of government and of course the monetary side of government indeed have roles to play. I have been speaking with Dr. Aliyu Ilias, who is an economic analyst, speaking to the recent data released by the Central Bank of Nigeria showing that Nigeria's money supply has in fact risen to 107.1 trillion naira. And what one may wonder is, why do we still have so much money in circulation despite the many efforts by the CBN to nip inflation in the bud? But our guest, Dr. Aliyu Ilias, has definitely done justice to explaining how that does impact you as a Nigerian, impact your business, and of course impact the country at large. Thank you very much for all the insights you've shared today on the program.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we will be taking on today's edition of Business Daily. But keep the conversation going on social media, across all the social media platforms, on Twitter, of course, which is called X, and on Instagram, on Facebook and YouTube. And we will be there to hear from you and to interact with you. And of course, like I said before, hear from you. My name is Chiamaka Enendu. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.